Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I drank my coffee really quickly, so I'm with all of you who are not morning people, although I have to be when I take my son to school every morning. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, all the folks at Creative Morning, the team, Creative Mornings, for inviting me today to be able to share a little bit about my work and how I'm going to talk about context, which is also can be very broad, but I figured that I would start with my own story and give you a little bit of context around my upbringing and where I'm coming from and how it then also influences my work as an artist. So thank you all for being present and for being here today. So the theme of context, and when I actually looked up the Latin origin, it's separated between two words, con meaning together and tex or tejer, which means to weave. Hi. and so the two meanings of weaving, this idea of like being together and weaving, something that's really interesting to me as I think about my process. So I wanted to start with a cute picture. So I want to begin in giving some context, as I mentioned, about my own story and my identity and perspective as an artist, and how these experiences have woven my perspective. And also to share, so I'll be sharing a little bit about that, and also sharing some information and giving some context on some current work related to the issues of immigration in our country. So these are my parents. They look pretty fly. It's one of my favorite pictures of them too. My father was born in 1945 in Pesaciales, Puerto Rico, the year where many Puerto Rican families began to migrate to the States. He was one of 13 siblings and one of 6 that were given away and raised by another family. The job opportunities on the island were dwindling, and at age 15 or 17, the story always changes because he never gives me a straight answer, he arrived to the United States and eventually landed on 17th and Green Street in Philadelphia with the hopes of being reunited with his biological mother and his other siblings. In February 1969, my mother arrived to Philadelphia at age 17 on a student visa to take care of my cousin Jimmy, the firstborn American in the family. One of 6 children, my mother recalls moving from one house to another as her mother struggled to find a safe place for them to reside. At age 13, my mother had to leave school and work by selling food in the streets to help her family. She arrived to the city in the dead of winter, wondering why the barren trees were not cut down for firewood. She trembled in the cold, wearing her thin slip-on shoes and a summer dress. And Philadelphia was a big change compared to the Caribbean coast of Colombia and the colonial streets of Mompos. In 1975, my parents, after 2 years of marriage, settled near the 9th Street Market. Some people call it the Italian Market. If you live in the neighborhood, you call it 9th Street. The market was a familiar place, a home away from home. And my mother dedicated 25 years working in the market in the daytime and also cleaned offices in the evening. My father also cleaned floors at night on 16th and Market for close to 30 years. As I would clean houses with my mother in Society Hill on weekends, I saw that others had many things that we did not have. I understood that even though we did not have much, we had more than what our family had back home. I learned that hard work was necessary to survive and nothing to be ashamed of. So my parents were not welcomed as one of the few Latino families living on the block, but after 42 years, they are now the ones that welcome the newcomers. So on this same block, on that same stoop, actually right across the street, it is still my home. I see the market, which is at the end of my block, as a living, breathing history that is formed by the contributions of immigrants working for a better future for their families like my own. In 1981, my maternal grandmother, Maria Dionisia Navarro, so quite a name. We called her Mama Icha, came to live with us. And my favorite memory was hearing her tell stories of Colombia at the kitchen table while drinking tinto. If there's any Colombians in the house, no? Tinto is really dark black coffee with close to 8 spoons of sugar. So I would play out those stories over and over and over again, trying to visualize every setting, color, taste, and scent. And these moments fed my love to tell stories. In 1989, my paternal grandfather, Gaspar Ortiz, came to live with us from Puerto Rico, where he worked the land and made charcoal. He dedicated his life working as he grew older. And as he grew older, he had no one to take care of him. So we quickly became a family of 7 living in a small South Philly row home. He did not know how to read or write. And it was during this time that I learned that I can communicate and share stories with my deaf grandfather through my drawings. At the age of 7, I traveled abroad for the first time to visit my family in Colombia. And it was in the 1980s, during the height of drug violence, both in the US and in Colombia. A lot of people criticized my parents because they thought that they were putting us in danger. And the first trip abroad really impacted me and partly influenced my perspective as an artist working in communities. Mostly because growing up in Philly as children, we stayed within our block. That was the block from corner to corner, because my parents, as new immigrants, were not trusting of our city. And during my trip to Colombia, in a place labeled as one of the most dangerous countries at that time, I felt the most free I ever had. There was a sense of community there, and I felt safe, and I felt I could go anywhere. It wasn't until that trip that I understood the spiritual richness of the people that shine brighter than the poverty that surrounded them. And the children with no shoes and holes in their clothes were the very same children that became my friends and who had the desire and willingness to learn. These children were reflections of who my parents once were. So as a child of immigrants, a product of 2 people that experienced extreme poverty and migrated to this country for a better opportunity, I carry their triumphs and struggles with me. Because of these experiences that I'm sharing today and many more, I see myself and my family reflected in the many communities that I work with. I also understand that when I rise, they rise with me. So it is within this context, I see my work as an artist as cultural currency that I use to invest back into the communities I connect with. I intentionally place my art in public space to say, we are here, we have been here, and this is what we contribute to our society and to this country. I create work in response to critical issues to provoke empathy, create awareness, spark action, and do it in a way that's both poetic and powerful. In June 2013, I witnessed 25 FBI and ICE agents, fully armed, pounding down the door of my neighbor's house, searching for the undocumented family that was living there before. Later that day, multiple reports of abuse were found against the community in South Philadelphia by ICE agents as they raided residential properties. One community member described how officers woke her children up from their beds, took her brother out at gunpoint in front of the family, and told her that she was not allowed to speak Spanish while she attempted to console her crying children. Her husband and her brother were fingerprinted, arrested, and held for deportation. These families join over the 400,000 immigrants that have been detained to support the multi-billion industry of the private prison system. This was one of the many moments that sparked my idea to create works around the issues of deportation. In 2015, I presented my Familias Separadas project through a series of temporary site-specific public artworks and audio testimonials that mark the locations and stories of immigrant families affected by deportations in our city. This wonderful photo is taken by Steve Weineck, who's in the space. The artwork entitled Eres mi todo, you are my everything, depicts the portrait of Maria and her daughter. And the work was placed on top of the Compass Rose by Edmund Bacon, where the statue of William Penn stands in the center of our city, where north, south, east, west, and west meet, and where it is home to where our city is home to about 50,000 undocumented immigrants. Maria's husband lived in Philadelphia and was deported. He attempted to cross the border again to be reunited with his family. He was caught by ICE in Texas, served a 3-year jail sentence in California, and was deported back to Mexico. Deportations have separated over 2 million families. Many times, women have been forced to choose between their families and their children, and the father of their children, and men are most likely the ones that are deported, forcing many women to become single mothers and driving immigrant communities deeper into poverty. Maria continues to live in Philadelphia. This is her son, standing by the words of his father, Jose. She has 5 children that she continues to take care of, and she speaks about the difficulty of making the decision to stay or leave to Mexico to be reunited with her husband. The U.S. has invested billions of dollars to deport immigrants and build borders, but has done nothing to address the root causes of immigration. Many people across the world are forced to leave their homelands due to violence and conflict. And in a lot of the work that I try to do, especially in presenting these stories, and in the context of presenting these stories, is to begin to talk about the stories that are happening within these families, to shy away from the statistics, from the numbers, from the percentages, and really focus on the individual. Te Amo, the gold necklace that Suyapa wears proudly on her on her chest, is in memory of her oldest daughter, and that she carries with her. Suyapa left Honduras, fleeing violence, crossed the border with her 2 youngest daughters. She was detained in Texas and is now fighting deportation proceedings in Philadelphia. The image of Suyapa's necklace stands in close proximity to Robert Indiana's love sculpture, where visitors are taking selfies and families are playing in the fountain. Suyapa speaks about love and what happens to love when you leave or when you're forced to leave. The 9th Street Market, this is again still my neighborhood, is the oldest open air market in the United States. And it is at this intersection where the majority of the newly arrived Mexican and Central American immigrants have opened and maintained businesses. The other half are businesses owned by 3rd-generation Italian immigrants that at times forget their own immigrant story. So it is at this intersection where the community member Cruz rides his bicycle to work every day. And while working one day, he was detained by ICE and was sent home with a probation bracelet. He had to wear the bracelet for 4 months, could not leave the house for more than 12 hours, and every 2 weeks, ICE agents would search his house as he had to report himself for 1 full year in their offices. The criminalization of Latinos has created a deportation machine that profits off the detention and deportation of the immigrant community. And the use of ankle bracelets in the case of Cruz and many others are part of this immigration system is an example of how private businesses rely on the deportation machine in order to thrive. So private businesses are contracted through ICE to monitor immigrants on ankle bracelets, and the more people detained and deported, the more money these private businesses make. The portrait of Cruz that you see here was chalk sprayed onto asphalt at this intersection, and the pedestrians and traffic slowly wear away his image on the street. In his audio testimonial, he speaks about how the city was a symbol of freedom, and now it feels more like a prison. I'm happy to say that Cruz, during this time and when this project was unveiled, received his green card and was able to return back to Mexico to see his mother after 20 years. I have to share these moments of triumphs because in the midst of all of this, it's really heavy to know that this is happening to our neighbors and our fellow friends in our city. The first step of deportation begins at the Immigration Customs Enforcement Building on 16th and Callow Hill Streets. It is at this location where I installed along with the community, a 90-foot-long stenciled image. The community members were undocumented families and volunteers from Juntos, an immigrant rights organization here in Philadelphia. The stencil shows the words of Ana, an undocumented mother who was unjustly deported to Guatemala. A judge issued her return, and she continues to fight against her deportation case in the United States. This is the install the evening of Columbus Day on 2015. On the evening of Columbus Day, ICE agents looked down on us as we installed the words of Ana. And this piece was centrally located at the entrance where detained loved ones are transported out to jails or prisons awaiting for their deportation. Ana is one of many families that have been detained at the Berks Family Prison. The Berks Detention Center is one of 3 family prisons in the United States where children as young as 2 weeks old have been incarcerated. The center has a laundry list of human rights abuses, which led a federal court to revoke their license and order the immediate release of all the families. 14 families were detained for more than 2 years. And during that time, they organized labor and hunger strikes as they fought for their freedom. 10 of the families were deported back to their home country, returning to the violence that they were fleeing. This happened in August, between May and August. And 4 families were released, still fighting against their possible deportation and living through the trauma of being detained. This year, due to inactivity from Governor Tom Wolf, the center's license was renewed and continues to detain families, mothers, fathers, and children. This is the only family prison that is in the state of Pennsylvania, and it is a state-run prison, which means Governor Wolf has the power to shut it down. My recent work, Seguimos Caminando, We Keep Walking, is a moving monument on the gates of City Hall that brings to the forefront stories written by detained undocumented mothers through a series of animated projections. The project is featured in Monument Lab, or was featured in Monument Lab, a public art and history project produced by the Mural Arts Program and the curatorial team led by Paul Farber and Ken Loom. And it's centered and operates around the central guiding question, which is what is an appropriate monument for the current city of Philadelphia? In my monument, I honor mothers previously or currently unjustly detained at Berks. And through March till August of this year, I met with 2 mothers from Honduras and El Salvador that were detained for over 600 days. The 2 mothers are now 4 of the 14 families that were detained for 2 years, as I mentioned. And they were able to write a combined story that was then featured in this animation.
Caminé con mi hijo por 25 días. El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, México. Caminamos por espinas, tierras blancas y montes. Crucé el río crecido, oscuro y de color café. Cayó agua fría del cielo, gris, mientras que mi hijo me decía, mami, no me sueltes. Agarré mi mochila y a mi hijo por miedo que les arrastraba las aguas fuertes y seguí caminando. Nos agarran, nos gritan, nos humillan, nos tratan como animales y nos encierran. Mojada y con frío abrazo a mi hijo sobre mi corazón, donde guardo todo y le pido perdón.
So it was at this time where they were uncertain about their future that I met with the mothers. A time where it was extremely difficult because their friends were just deported just a few days before. and their lives were still at the hands of the judge that was reviewing their cases. After writing many campaign letters and pleas to the governor, and at that time, President Obama, before 45 came into place, they were emotionally exhausted. And because of this, I'm very conscious of where it is that I stand. And I know that my perspective as an ally is not the same as someone who was directly affected by the issue that I am exploring in my work. I understand that I have the power and privilege to go in and out of that center where the mothers were detained, a privilege that is really a human right of freedom, and that they and their children have been denied. As an artist working in communities, I believe that it's important that we hold these experiences with care, and that we offer moments of healing through the creative process. So when I met with the mothers, we spoke mostly about the moments that they felt the most free before being detained. I asked them what gives them strength, and one of the mothers said, the laughter of my child. It was through these conversations that the mothers wrote that part of this combined story that shared their experiences before and their hopes after detention. I pray at night, I see through my window, and I would like to touch the stars. I would like to become one of them, to shine in the dark and walk along with my son towards freedom. So the voice that you heard in the animated projection is the recorded audio of one of the mothers reading her story days after her release. And here she is walking free with her son. So although both mothers are free, as I mentioned before, they still face the fear of deportation. They continue to wear probation bracelets. They have to report to ICE every week, and they're adjusting being outside of the center and dealing with the trauma of being detained, not just for themselves, but the trauma that it has caused on their children. So we are living at a time where we have an administration that supports white supremacy, hate, and racism. And as we tear down these monuments, both the physical and the symbolic monuments, I'm dedicated to building new monuments that honor, elevate the people that are continuing to fight for freedom. So in the presence of the statues of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and Frank Rizzo, you see the stories of the mothers unfold in the animated projection as the voice of one of the mothers speaking in Spanish echoes through City Hall and in our city streets. When I was visiting the mothers at Berks, I was not allowed to leave them with any art supplies. So after several visits, I found that I was only able to leave them with paper and pens. The idea of creating paper flowers came from these visits, and it's also a tradition that I learned in the kitchen with my grandmother as she told those amazing stories. The mothers created 10 to 15 flowers with messages of freedom and hope that traveled outside of the confines of the center and became the inspiration for the extension of my moving monument called Flores de Libertad, a creative action. So in preparation for the creative action, I offered a series of paper flower making workshops, and this was done at the Barnes Foundation along with other locations in Philadelphia, and more than 100 participants that included students, educators, families, other artists in Philadelphia, and they shared their messages of freedom for the mothers. A total of 1,600 flowers with messages of freedom, including the flowers made by the mothers at Berks, were hand-dyed and assembled at the north gates of City Hall in late October. And the flowers installed together spell out the 10 by 40-foot word, libertad, which is a word that the families chose, freedom, liberty. And this creative action was followed by a press conference led by the Shutdown Berks Coalition to put pressure on Governor Tom Wolf, again, who has the power to shut down the detention center. So this is a little bit of our process and how Flores de Libertad came to be.
Soy el agua, soy la vida, soy la madre, soy la fuente cristalina, soy un canto musical de clave.
Um, so this is the final piece. And what I want to share is that stories are powerful, especially within the context that they're told or represented. And in my practice, I ask myself, how do I begin to shift power structures? How do I utilize my privilege, skills, and resources as a way of providing opportunities to others? How can I support them to have the courage to share their stories, especially in spaces where they're not represented? So when I come to this work in all these different settings, it's not just finding the connections of our humanity, but it's understanding how I can utilize the creative process to amplify and elevate others' voices through the platform or public space in the most authentic way that I can. So thank you all. This is what I have to share.